Okay, I'm very happy to be here today to give this presentation to such an esteemed audience and such a broad-based audience from around the world. So yeah, it's a great opportunity for myself and Keith Willett to share our work. This presentation is going to be on cybersecurity modeling and simulation. This is based on Keith's PhD dissertation. So Keith is an expert on system security. I think he's a past co-chair of the System Security Working Group. And I'm contributing mostly in the area of modeling and simulations and optimization. So feel free to contact myself or Keith after the meeting. I'll provide our email addresses at the end. Just a note of maybe a little bit of humor is that this picture on the side is supposed to be a screenshot of a laptop computer that has been taken over by some ransomware. As an outline to my presentation today, I want to talk about this introduction to modeling and simulation for cybersecurity, where I'll talk about the reasons for doing modeling and simulation, the uses of modeling and simulation, and the approaches that are used in modeling and simulation. And then we'll get into our approach for modeling and simulation of cybersecurity. Our approach begins with modeling the system and then with a focus on the value delivery that's provided by the system. And then we get into looking at risk and threat models and threats to the system. Then we move from there to cybersecurity operations and the modeling of those. And I'm going to finish with some discussion about testing for threats in a system, and then I'll have some summary conclusions and recommendations. So one of the major reasons to do modeling and simulation is to develop a shared understanding of the system involved. And so some of the aspects of this shared understanding for all stakeholders in the system is the idea of, what's the product of the system, what's the value delivered by the system. Also, you want a shared understanding of the weaknesses, vulnerabilities, and threats to the system. You want a shared understanding of the risks in terms of likelihood and impact of those risks. And then, of course, you want to look at the safeguards and their benefits and their costs. So it's very important to build that shared understanding. Here's an overview of a dynamic procedure for conducting security. And it begins with a risk tolerance up here in the upper right-hand corner that develops a risk posture and a desired security posture. And then when you compare the desired security posture to the actual security posture, you may have a gap between the two. And with some time, you can close the gap by applying resources and allocating resources differently. And then with time, that improves the actual security posture, and you monitor the posture continually, and eventually, hopefully, you close the gap between the actual security posture and the desired security posture. Some of the reasons for doing modeling and simulation in cybersecurity is that it gives you multiple perspectives on the system, and you can see the system holistically. It identifies points of uncertainty. You can close gaps, knowledge gaps, and think about the system differently. So through this, you can see new opportunities. Sometimes, we're focused on loss-driven systems engineering, but we can also focus on opportunities-driven systems engineering. Now, there's many uses for modeling simulation, and I'm going to talk about a few of them today, not all of them on this list, but I'm going to talk about operations optimization, multi-year budget planning, and decision support. And when I mention multi-year budget planning, I'm primarily talking about resource budgeting. And with that regard, I'm talking about budgeting for people, skills, knowledge, and time. But there are other resources that you may want to do some modeling and simulation and manage the multi-year budget. There's quite a number of approaches to modeling and simulation in cybersecurity. This is not a complete list, but it's quite a long list of approaches. And I'm going to talk today about probability-based modeling, operations research-based modeling, system dynamics modeling and simulation, and discrete event simulation, risk, and threat simulation. So I'm not going to talk about all of them, but there are many other approaches to modeling and simulation in cybersecurity. So this is, now I'm going to get into the process that we use in modeling and simulation for cybersecurity. We believe that you should begin with the system characteristics and when we talk about the system characteristics, we mean looking at the structure, behavior, functions, resources, and content of the system and the environment that the system is in. And we want to focus on the value delivery, that is the products produced by the system and how they produce value for stakeholders. And when we talk about output or value delivery, we can think about various characteristics of the value, and generally these support cybersecurity, such as reliability, resistance, sustainability, safety, security. However, there could be also some of these aspects or these characteristics that may may inhibit cybersecurity, such as efficiency, where you may not build in all of the redundancy necessary to really produce a very comprehensive risk posture. Orchestration is primarily the command and control system of the system, and command involves basically the decision making and the governance, and control is the way those decisions are carried out to the system's constituent parts. Some of these processes are automatic, or there's autonomy in them, and some of them have dependencies, and by dependencies I primarily mean people in the loop, so people that can manage some of the component systems and get involved in improving the cybersecurity posture. We look at risk perspectives. There's generally three types of risk that are often considered. Project risk is often considered in project management, but we're not going to consider that today. We're going to talk about system risk, which is the operations of the system and getting the system back up and operating after a cyber attack. And we're also going to talk about organizational risk. And that primarily is looking at the reputation of the organization that manages the system, and by getting the system up and running after an attack, that can definitely improve the reputation of the organization. And of course, if you're not able to get the system up and running quickly, that can be a detriment to the organization's reputation. Modeling risk is difficult. And as I said, you begin with a risk perspective, and you can look at risk from a qualitative point of view as well as a quantitative point of view. And you need to consider both the tactical and strategic impacts of threats. And you need to use threat models to simulate attacks. We're going to talk about threats being randomly occurring in time, but they focus on an organization and they're malicious in intent. So they're an attack on the system, on the organization and the system involved. And some examples are phishing, ransomware, spyware, Trojan horses, and viruses. Cyber crime is becoming a big business, and ransomware is one of the major concerns these days in cybersecurity. And in ransomware, there's often the pooling of resources between cybercrime businesses. There's venture capital that's invested in cybercrime businesses, and there's outsourcing of cybercrimes, such as, for example, national entities outsourcing to private companies. There's also in ransomware, obviously, a focus on the ability to pay, so they attack organizations that are generally important and have money. When we're looking at threats, we need to know what they look like so we can detect them, and what they do and where they function, so we can try to resolve the problems they create, what they target, how to find them, as I said, with detecting them, and what to do about them. That is, what's your response to this attack or this threat? So those are the kind of questions you need to ask. We consider using a number of threat models. So there's quite a few threat models that you can use. For example, the stride model, maybe some of you are familiar with it. The S stands for spoofing, the T stands for tampering, the R stands for repudiation, the I stands for information disclosure, the D stands for denial of service, and the E stands for elevation of privilege. So you can see that these are many different types of threats that are considered in the STRIDE model. But there are other models that you could use. Then we get into modeling the operations of cybersecurity in an organization, the cybersecurity processes, and we look at a number of phases in the cybersecurity workflow. That it begins with monitoring the system, which is a constant activity, monitoring for anomalies, and then if an anomaly is detected, that's generally some kind of a pattern of activity that is unexpected, such as, so for example, trying to access credit card numbers, which will trigger some activity of the cybersecurity organization. And you want to characterize this anomaly as possibly a known virus, or possibly something brand new. And then, you need to notify certain people within the organization. So there's generally different levels in a large organization, and different systems and database connections. So you might notify local areas, or national responses, or even international organizations, international aspects of your organization. Then you do a tiered triage. You try to identify whether this anomaly needs to be handled immediately, or whether you can isolate it, quarantine it, and then look at it with a little more time. You may escalate the activity to sending it to subject matter experts, and these people may have specific knowledge about specific viruses, or, for example, if this is an unknown virus or unknown anomaly or attack, you might set up a tiger team of subject matter experts to handle this new type of threat. Isolation is a big part of cybersecurity. You can turn off infected systems, and generally, when you're building the system, you want to have safeguards that you can turn on that based on having a semi-isolated system, so that if an adversity gets into the system, you can isolate it and it doesn't spread. Then it's important to try to restore the operations, even if it's at a diminished capability. You want to do this as quickly as possible, because often speed is important to the reputation of the organization. Then you go to root cause analysis, and you try to determine what type of anomaly this is, whether it's a virus or an attack, or just a hardware failure that needs to be addressed. That's an activity that's often done by subject matter experts. And then you recover the operations to the desired level of performance. And this may take more time than restoring the operations at a diminished capacity, but it's important to try to do this in a timely manner as well. And finally, there's feedback, where you want to determine what happened, how and why it happened, improve the safeguards, improve detections, improve characterizations, and get the defenses working better. So in modeling the operations, we have two primary techniques we use. The first one is discrete event simulation, which looks at discrete attacks and discrete people in the system, and discrete number of steps in the system. This is basically a concept of people in the system that are handling these attacks or handling the process, and they might get a number of things on the go at the same time, and that could set up a bottleneck in the system. Similarly, there's another approach that we use called system dynamics, which is more of a continuous time system of modeling. It uses basically the same characteristics of the operations. However, instead of having discrete elements, we have a series of servers that produce processes with a certain time to complete those processes. Again, we're looking at bottlenecks here. Where are the bottlenecks in the system? Where does the system get bogged down? And when we resolve a bottleneck, when you resolve a bottleneck, you often find that it just moves the bottleneck to another part of the system, and you don't get really improved complete system performance. So we recommend that you conduct a marginal analysis approach to allocating resources to the various processes in the system. And with marginal analysis is primarily the technique of bang for the buck. So you want to get a good return on investment with every dollar expended on cybersecurity. And the way we believe you can do that is by handling resources so that they have the same utilization throughout all the processes in the operations. So, for example, you want to be up here at the knee of the curve for all the different components of the system, and then when you look at the system performance, this could be some kind of a series connection of the elements, or it could be some kind of an average support, average response time for the operations. So we think this is a useful technique to manage resources in the long term, and trying to, as I said, get the utilization of the resources to be balanced across the whole system. So that's primarily the way we are looking at modeling and simulation for cybersecurity. I want to just end this presentation with a discussion of testing We think this is an interesting approach to testing that you may not have heard of before. You may have heard of it, but we do think this is a useful idea that comes from our ideas about modeling and simulation. So as we said before, in cybersecurity, we want to identify and address anomalies, which are deviations from what is expected. Some anomalies are threats that warrant attention, and others are benign and are okay to ignore. And we want to have a test to determine if the anomaly is a threat. And with a test like that, there's four possible outcomes. There's true positives, which identify a threat as a threat. There's false positives, which identify a non-threat as a threat. There's true negatives, which identify a non-threat as a non-threat. And there's false negatives, which identify a threat as a non-threat. So we want to try to maximize the true positives and the true negatives. And this approach involves Bayesian statistics and Bayesian probability methods. And you can use this to optimize resource allocation in the testing process so that you address real threats, the true positives, and not waste resources pursuing non-threats, the false positives, and ignore non-threats, the true negatives, and not ignore real threats, the false negatives. And one of the great things about the Bayesian approach is that there's a feedback element where with every test you get smarter. And so we think this is a really important feature of this approach. When you apply this Bayesian technique, there's three priors or things you need to know. And they are prevalence, sensitivity, and specificity. And then you can develop an estimate of the posterior. The prevalence is the actual occurrence of threats in a population of anomalies. The sensitivity is the true positives of the test, and the specificity are the true negatives of the test. And the posterior is the probability that the anomaly is a threat given a positive test. And so priors can be difficult to estimate. There are a number of approaches, for example, looking at literature on industries and the global population of threats and anomalies, or you could look at a particular industry or a particular organization. And if there's no published priors available, you can gather data from your system, or you could develop experiments with your tests to try to determine these prior values. So here's an example of an experiment that was done where there were 500 anomalies generated and tested. There were 66 actual threats in the anomalies. So and that's the prevalence count. There were 55 true positive tests. That's the sensitivity count. And then there was 356 true negative tests, and that's the specificity count. So the prevalence is the threats divided by the anomalies, 66 divided by 500, which is 13%. The sensitivity is the positive test results given a threat, which is 55 divided by 66, or 83%. And the specificity is the negative results given a non-threat, which is 356 divided by 434. 434 is 500 minus 66, and that's about 82%. So with these estimates of priors, we can get an estimate of the posterior, which is the probability that this is a threat given a positive test result. And this is 41%. In this case, which is much higher than the prevalence estimate. So this test is doing a fairly good job of identifying threats. If you were just looking at the prevalence of these threats, you would only be able to estimate maybe 13% of the anomalies were threats. But using this test, you could get this up to 41%. It's an interesting counterintuitive aspect to improving testing, and that is that when you increase the sensitivity, and that is the number of positive tests given a threat. So for example, if in this case we increased it from 83% to 95%, this ended up with a new posterior, which is the probability of it being a threat given a positive test to 45%, which is a slight increase over the previous case of 41%. But if you increase the specificity, that is the probability of a negative test given a non-threat from 82% in the previous case to 95%, you get a new posterior of 71%, which is a significant improvement over the current situation. And so it's interesting that that improving the ability to distinguish non-threats actually improves the quality of your test. And this is primarily because in this system, as in many systems, the whole concept of testing is overwhelmed by non-threats and anomalies that are non-threats. So improving your ability to identify those non-threats can really have an improvement on your testing. As I said, you're learning all the time. With each test, you're getting a better estimate of the priors and therefore a better estimate of the posterior. Another way you can learn is by doing multiple tests on the same threat. So here's an example of two different tests that have the same characteristics that are applied to the same threat. And so with one positive test, we estimated that there was a 41% chance that this was a real threat. And with one negative test, we found that there's a possibility that this is a threat. It's a 3% possibility. It's not zero. So basically a negative test could produce some false negatives. And therefore there's a 3% chance that this could be a real threat, even though it came back with a negative test. Now, if we do two tests, now we're assuming two different tests, but with the same characteristics for simplicity's sake. We have, if the second test comes back positive after a first positive test, it increases the probability that this is a threat to 77%. If you have a positive test followed by a negative test, it drops back down to 13%, which is about the same as the prevalence. And if you have two negative tests in a row, the probability that this is a real threat drops down to 0.6%, which is not zero, but it is much smaller than our previous approach. So that's about all I have to say today. But of course, you can contact us later and to find out more. But in summary, we found that there's that we looked at modeling and simulation of a system, the structure and behavior of a system with a focus on value delivery. We looked at the justification for modeling and simulation and the approaches that are used in modeling and simulation. And then we looked at the process that we suggest, which is modeling the system and then integrating threats and then security. And by integrating threats, we wanted to use threat models. And then when we're modeling cybersecurity, we model the workflow or the processes in the activities of the organization. And we want to try to identify bottlenecks in those workflows and processes, and then resolve those bottlenecks using the marginal analysis technique. And then we also wrapped it up with a discussion of threat testing and generating priors for the Bayesian approach. Conclusions and recommendations. The basic conclusion is that there are many promising approaches to modeling and simulation for cybersecurity. And we believe that we have a comprehensive approach that begins with modeling the system with a focus on value delivery, and then including threat models to provide input to the cybersecurity operations, and then using discrete event simulation or system dynamics to model the operations of cybersecurity and identify bottlenecks and performance gaps in the operations, and then using marginal analysis for multi-year resource allocation to try to remove those bottlenecks and balance the utilization of resources. Finally, we think that the Bayesian approach, it can provide reliable, efficient, and continuously improving testing. This is the book chapter that this presentation is based on. It's recently published in the Handbook for Security Science by Springer, and if you want a copy of this book chapter, you can contact us at this email address, and we'd be very happy to collaborate with anyone who is interested in finding out more about our approach to modeling and simulation for cybersecurity, and possibly applying these techniques to your organization. So I thank you for your attention, and I'll open the floor to questions at this point.
Thank you, Evan. I'll read out a few of the questions that have come in, and hopefully you can answer. So Ray has asked, are you able to model and simulate a virus which could steal a user password without them knowing?
Well, that's definitely a type of threat that is part of our work, but we're primarily focusing on the resolution of threats and the idea of figuring out what the processes are in taking actions against threats. So viruses are only a small part of our model. They are definitely a major part, but we look at many other types of threats as well.
Next question from Brian. You've mentioned that a multitude of threat models exist. Do you have a generic model for threat modeling or a meta model that would allow you to normalize across the various threat models?
No, but that's a good idea. I think that it would be useful to look into a general model that brings out the best parts of all of those different threat models, and maybe but again, a lot of these threat models are proprietary, and so maybe that would be difficult to actually draw out the details, but I think it would be very useful to have a threat model that takes all the best elements of each of those different threat models that we discussed.
David has a couple questions here. Does a threat model apply to only one kind of threat?
Oh, no. Threat models should apply to many different types of threats, and basically, we're trying to handle all types of threats. Some may be known and some may be unknown, and then of course, if they're known, you may be able to handle them fairly quickly, and if they're unknown, as I said, you may need to set up some kind of a team activity to figure out what to do with them. So yeah, I think threat models should be used to generate not just known threats, but also new types of threats.
Okay. David's other question is, could you please discuss cybersecurity in the context of a risk management framework?
Yeah, I think that this is a good question, but because as I said, we're looking at a risk posture, and we're saying that we want to have a certain effectiveness against all risks. So I think when we talk about the risk posture, we're looking at say how much investment we're going to put in cybersecurity operations versus other types of operations that a company or an organization could invest in. So I think there is definitely some ideas about about the costs and benefits of various safeguards and the costs and benefits of having a, a strong operations, cybersecurity operation versus possibly, because basically cybersecurity operations is a type of insurance, and so you're investing in insurance that you may need, but you may wonder whether it's worth the investment. But definitely these days, I think most organizations do know that it's necessary to make an investment in cybersecurity operations. Maybe they have a question on how much they need to invest, and possibly our approach could help them with getting, like I said, the best bang for the buck from their investment.
Good. Deg has a question. Can you give an example of one of these tests that give a negative or positive result? Something a little more tangible.
Yeah. I think that basically we're looking at tests in maybe an abstract way, and so I really can't put my finger on a really good test that I can come up with. However, definitely I'll pass that along to Keith Willett, and if you want to put your name in the chat, I'll get back to you later with an answer.
Okay, yeah, I've got the name here for you. I'll pass that on later. Graham has a good question here. So how would you validate the model? You've mentioned that you would continuously improve, I guess, as you go through cycles, but how would you validate a model?
Well, I think the way I validate models is by looking at the history of an operation and trying to match the model to the history. So, for example, with this type of modeling and simulation, you generally develop some kind of a behavior over time, which shows how the system is reacting at various points in time. And then you can look at say a real system, or examine a real operation and collect data on that, and then ensure that your model can match that historical record. So with a good match of a historical pattern, I think you can have confidence that the modeling and simulation can do a good job of predicting how the system will perform in the future.
Okay, so you do need some kind of empirical data, I guess.
Yeah, you need to test. You need to collect time series data and collect operational data, and then try to match that with the model.
Okay. Next, Patrick has a question. Patrick's asking, do you have any experience with incorporating your work within a SysML model? So Patrick's team is incorporating Simulink models from MATLAB into Cameo and Magic Draw and running them against requirements. So he's interested to see if you had any experience with that.
Yeah, again, I'm at a bit of a loss for that question. I did see that in the earlier questions that came from the registration,
Right.
and I'm not personally that familiar with Cameo. I think there are, say, members of this Canadian chapter board who are maybe more familiar with Cameo. And again, I'll have to postpone that and try to get back to you and get Keith Willett to handle that question. Keith, like I said, is really more involved in the security aspects of this work, and I'm primarily into the modeling and simulation and operations research, optimization aspects of the work. So Keith, I'll definitely contact Keith and get back to you.
Okay, very good. Yeah, Patrick said thank you. Another question from David. So this is three questions here. It's good. Keep them coming. So David's asking, what are companies doing these days to avoid ransomware?
Yeah, I think the primary idea is to approach the phishing aspect of ransomware. So definitely, you know, the simplest things are different authentication processes. I think one of the best ideas is some kind of biometric approaches where you maybe have a voice recognition or some kind of other system to identify that this person is authorized to use the system.
Okay, so yeah, authentication. Good, good. I'm going to dig back into some of the learning objectives and questions that were asked from the registrants. So Karen is interested to know if there's any developments in system tools and models that could be leveraged for human factors cybersecurity design.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, basically our approach is all about human factors in terms of the operations of cybersecurity, maybe not in terms of the safeguards. In terms of like the previous talk about how to protect against ransomware, but our work is in, like I said, the people, time, skills that are available in the cybersecurity organization. So I believe maybe that is the part of human factors that we're looking at in particular. And so you know, so we're looking at how people how the system of people in the processes respond to an attack efficiently.
Okay. Here's another one from Graham. I'm interested in this as well. How can we use modeling to augment testing for cybersecurity? In Graham's case, specifically for medical devices, but even in general. How can we use modeling to augment testing?
Like I said, I think you know, like I said, I think that this discussion of the Bayesian approach to testing is a good example of modeling and simulation applied to testing, and basically, you know, we're talking about in the early stages of a cybersecurity operation, we want to identify whether this anomaly that is seen in the system is actually a threat or not. So, basically, that involves testing of the anomaly to see whether it's a known situation, a known virus, or whether it's something new, and if it's something new, whether our test will detect it as a real threat, or whether it's just a type of anomaly that you don't have to worry about. So yeah, I think that testing is a big part of our work, and it comes in the early stages of the cybersecurity operations.
Right. Okay. I think we have time for maybe one more question. Let me see, which one should I pick? Well, let's go with something a bit general. What industry trends could you share with us with respect to model-based systems engineering regarding cybersecurity?
Well, definitely the trend I think that's probably most prevalent is trying to protect against ransomware. I think ransomware is probably the top priority of a lot of organizations to not be attacked through ransomware. So so I would think that would be probably a very high priority and a thing that a lot of organizations are focused on right now. And there may be other types of viruses that such as techniques where they get into the system and they don't identify themselves right away, or you can't see them right away, but they sort of sit as like I said, a Trojan horse that you end up with unknown problems that could appear later. So, for example, I think there's a lot of worry about these organizations that will get into a system and just wait for an opportunity to attack, and then and then when they get an opportunity to attack, they will they may just wait for quite a long time before they actually exercise the option to attack, and they just embed themselves in the system. And so
No,
if you could identify those, maybe you can get rid of them before they actually have the attack.
no, Ivan, what are there typical triggers for if you have this Trojan horse type of thing? Are there specific triggers that are common to initiate the
I don't
action?
really think there's very good triggers, because as I said, in our approach, we're looking for anomalies which are unexpected behavior. So
Mhm.
the only trigger that might happen is if you you try to execute some part of the operation, some part of the system, and it doesn't respond properly. So sometimes I guess the trigger would be trying to make sure that you're monitoring all the parts of the system regularly, and trying to see if anomalies arise when you activate parts of it.
Okay, so that monitoring is very important. Mhm. All right, we're past time. So Ray, did you want to close the meeting?
Well, okay, so we'll come to a closure of the meeting. So we thank you, Ivan. You have a very exciting and vibrant topic that I'm sure there's a lot more research that needs to be done, and before it becomes a standard product and a standard way and methodology to do it. But these are the things that as systems engineers, we love to get into. So thank you,
Yeah,
everyone, for attending.
thanks, Ray, and thanks for the opportunity to talk to such an august group. And like I said, I think the whole organization of the Canadian INCOSE board is really interested in collaborating in the future.
Yes, so we'd like to actually get into more depth in terms of maybe some of these threat models as well. I think that would be very interesting. Not all of us are as familiar with them as what we might like. So stay tuned, and if you're interested in this subject, please be in touch. We would love to develop more along this subject. I think cybersecurity is something that all systems engineers, regardless of your area of expertise, needs at least some knowledge in. So thank you and good night.